We want to welcome you to our next session of St. Charles at Home. These are opportunities for us to have a discussion. Today we're with Donna from the Parish Council and also a longtime parishioner and resident here in the Brooklyn Heights area. And so, Donna, what do you want to discuss today?
Well, I'm just going to jump in with one thing that you were right. I mean, a long-term resident, it's amazing the number of changes that have occurred just in the city and in the neighborhood as we've gone, and even at St. Charles. So it's great to be here. We're going through it's a terrible time, but I think I feel like the community of St. Charles is really pulling together, and it's exciting. But so where I was going, and I reread the gospel and I reread your homily from Sunday. And what I liked was the way you connected, you talked about the concept of time, both from John's gospel, and then you connected it as well to just that time is not static. We're not static in the church based on what was in the first reading, where the Hebrews and the Hellenes, they needed to get together and talk about how do they move forward in a different way. And as well, connecting the fact that, the passion, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ really led us to a new history for a new time in the world, in the church, etc. But when I look, and I love that word dynamism, but when I look at the church sometimes, I don't feel it's really dynamic. I feel like we hit Vatican II and things really changed. And I think there's so many positives. But then I feel like today we're at the point where people kind of want to turn back the clock a little, instead of meeting people where they are and trying to figure out how do we move forward positively together. I don't feel that's always positive. So
I think what you have to deal with all the time is the uncertainty and the fear. If you remember in the gospel, Jesus is telling them, this is the now, this is the now. And Philip says to him, well, wait a minute. What now are we talking about? When will any of this happen? And the point is that it is happening. It's right in front of us, but it's frightening to grasp it. And it's so challenging to grasp it. I mean, that's why in the history of the church is a dynamic institution. But those moments of dynamism are, I don't want to say rare, but not part of the institution. They're not part of the bureaucracy. The dynamism tends to be on the fringe. An example, Mother Teresa, was on the fringe. She had to basically beg them to let her go to do what she did in the streets of Calcutta. And initially, she didn't get any support for that. It's only as that grew that people then started attaching themselves to it. Recognizing the dynamism of what she was doing, the dynamic of love that she was concretizing, and so people could get attached to it. The history of the church is filled with those. That's why we have saints. The saints are not the ordinary.
You're right.
They're the extraordinary, and many of them were on the fringe. Some of them were persecuted in the process of getting to where they got, until somebody discovered that, oh, wait, this is what we really should be about.
Right. Well, and now that you say that, it makes me think, I think, I sit on the board of Mercy Home, and Catherine McCauley, who started the Sisters of Mercy, was not a sister when she first started going out and helping those that were less fortunate. And I guess essentially the church said, you can't do that unless you're one of, you're in ministry. And
you got to fit in the box. You got to fit in the box.
Do you think that they really still see the boxes as ways to help us move forward in a positive manner as the church?
Well, I think what you're seeing right now is that you have a pope who is basically in the box, but attempting to break out of the box. And that's why he's experiencing all the controversy that he's experiencing. I mean, there's a lot of, you see as well as I do, the negativity, people wanting to basically shut him down.
And is that because, I'm sorry, that's my washing machine. Is that because people are scared, do you think? Or that their faith is so firmly entrenched in what's happening here in terms of what they learned in school or in Sunday school, that they can't move beyond that?
I think that's part of it, but I think the bigger part is fear. They're afraid of the future, because the future presents challenges. The future is, in a sense, you're walking into the unknown.
And we are, right?
Yeah, and people are not comfortable doing that. They like static. They like to know what the next hour, the next day is going to bring, the next week is going to bring. They have their lives planned out in that sense. And all of a sudden you introduce all of this uncertainty. People get very anxious about that. I remember back in Vatican II, and I think you relate to this with me. Remember back in Vatican II when the first changes came out. Remember all the controversy when you didn't have to eat fish on Friday anymore. And everybody was crazy. What can they do? What's going to happen to the people who went to hell because they ate fish on Friday and this, that, and the other thing? And you wanted to say to people, but see, your world is so narrow. Right. Because the obligation of fish was not universal. Okay, there were places within the Catholic community that never had that as part of their obligation.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, but see, that's the point is that, again, we all live with very narrow parameters. Our knowledge of history is very limited, and it's limited to what we want. What we want to know. And a lot of what we want is we want to block out what we don't want to know. And so that gives us a sense of security. It's the same we're human beings, and that's just the nature of human beings.
Well, it is, but what's scary is I feel like that for the church, a lot of what I'll call the parishes, and we're not the fringes, we're what makes the church the church. Without us, there can't be a diocese, and on, all the way up to the Vatican. But that people are willing to expand and try to reach out and do things, but there is a hierarchy, and it's not everyone, but a lot of those in the leadership of the church, and maybe not at the Vatican. I think Pope Francis is amazing. He pulls people together, and people from all religions are, I think they're amazed by him and his willingness to outreach and move forward and to at least think about things that are different and, to your point, outside the box. But yet there is this layer of entrenched leadership that again, it's fear, but is it that they lose power if the box changes? And
I think part of it, most definitely, power is a big part of it. Power and privilege, come into play in many people's decisions. And so if you go there, power and privilege has been part of their life experience. And all of a sudden, this guy comes in, and is making these radical changes in their mind. He really hasn't made...
Right, they're not that radical.
No, he hasn't done anything radical yet. In my opinion, he hasn't done anything radical. He's done some nice adjustments here and there, but they're really minor things. Who the hell cares if he lives in the palace or he lives in the hotel?
Right.
What difference does it make to anybody?
Exactly.
But it's a symbolic gesture. And that symbolic gesture has a lot of implications for people, particularly for the power, who happen to live in very palatial apartments. and most of them rent-free. And so they live well.
Right.
And then you have this symbolic gesture, which really it's non-consequential in law, but it sends a message.
Right. It threatens people, to your
Yes.
point.
Yeah.
And I guess the scary thing is, to go back to the time and how we evolve, is that I think we are potentially losing people because they feel excluded. So how do we begin to work and make sure we bring them in a positive way, and that they understand that, everyone in the church isn't in a box, and that they are welcome, and we
Well,
are
I think,
a community.
yeah, I think that certainly goes to how you, again, most people, the majority of people, okay, their experience of the church is local. It's the parish.
Yes.
Okay? And so it's, how do you operate a parish? Do you operate an open door parish? Or do you operate a closed door parish? I don't know many parishes that have around their fences signs that say strollers are welcome here.
Right.
I mean, I remember when I was out in California and we were redoing the cathedral, and we had an enclosed room that was for parents with their children. And one of the first things I did in the design process was get that out of here.
Hey.
And did I pay a price with some of the older people?
Oh.
Were, what do you mean we're not going to have? I'm going to have to listen to those kids cry? And I said, yeah, you're going to have to listen to them because it's part of life.
Right.
And so we ought to get used to living in the real world.
Well, and you've always said children crying is their way of praying to God or singing. So it's, we're all able to do things in different ways, and they're just expressing their being. So it's a wonderful thing.
And it's a sign of health and life.
Right.
So I mean, but again, people, they get accustomed to a certain style. And when you go to change that style, the hair goes up in the back of their neck. And you want to say, after a while, the hair will go down and you'll get accustomed to this now.
Well, that's it. I guess the church is no different than any other organization where the same thing happens. It's just because sometimes I feel like we live it so intimately. I mean, in the sense that we're there not because we have to go and we get paid, but because we choose to. And it's something that has meaning, that you sort of hope that we don't have those same issues that you have when you go to work or when you go wherever else. But it's like, to you, it's life.
You have to always remember that the church is basically an institution. And as an institution, it's a bureaucracy, because you can't have institutions without bureaucracy, unfortunately. The hope is that you can eliminate the bureaucracy element and then preserve the human element of the institution, that's where the difference between the static and the dynamic comes in.
Well, and that's why the dynamic is so beautiful, and it's a great word. I'm not sure I had ever associated it or thought about it with regard to the church before, till you brought it up on Sunday, because I just don't always tend to think of it that way until we got Pope Francis, who is doing little things, but at least has an open mind, it seems, to want to hear different points of view, and bringing the bishops and the cardinals together to express those views is a good thing, and asking for parishioner or parish input as well. So the fact that, well, as I said, I thought it was a great word, and it's so meaningful, and hopefully that as we move forward, particularly now, because it's going to be a tough time for all of us through the coronavirus epidemic, that what does the church look like? And we don't know.
Well, I think that's a very real question, Donna, because once you get back to some level of normalcy, okay, who's coming?
Right.
Okay, have you, in a sense, when you have these kind of situations, where you have a prolonged period where you have broken a pattern, you know, and people live out of patterns. I mean, let's be honest.
You're right.
They live out of habit. Okay. Well, when you open the doors again, which hopefully will happen in the not too distant future, how do you recreate the habit?
Well, that's a good point. But it makes me also think of, and this is something that Father John had said just when we found out that we couldn't open the church at all anymore. Mm-hmm. And we talked about, you know, having the Mass via, Zoom or whatever you want to call it. And the fact that many people were upset that they couldn't go to church and receive the Eucharist. And it was Father John who mentioned that, well, there are plenty of saints and others throughout history who were deprived of all of those things, and found, in their heart, other ways to worship. And then when they were able to, if they were able to, they came back. So hopefully, as people have understood that there are reasons why we can't gather, that once we can, and I will say that I've talked to a number of folks where I have made phone calls who were all looking forward to coming back. So hopefully that comes through, because that's what we don't know. And we don't know how long this will go on and who can return and who may feel afraid to return, which I'm sure has happened throughout the history of the church as well. There have been times.
Well, you look at different situations where there were persecutions, and the fear that people had of being identified, even walking near a church, that could be their life gone. I mean, they put their life at risk with something like that. Who was it the other day in the morning prayer? It was the remembrance of the monks in the time of Henry VIII, who all lost their lives because they wouldn't adhere to recognizing him as the head of the Church of England. And so, I mean, and then you look at that whole history of how people had to hide priests, and if they got caught, I mean, it was, there's a lot there that speaks to this moment. And yet, the thing that has always come out, I remember the old pastor in my home parish, who we used to laugh at all the time because we thought he was insane. I remember him one day, I was standing in front of the church with him, and he said to me, "We need to pray for a persecution." And I looked at him and I said, "Father Icini, what the hell are you talking about?" I didn't say, "What the hell are you talking about?" But, he's no, we need, because the church thrives in persecution.
Interesting.
That's when the strength of the faith manifests itself most really. So it's, when things are too quiet and too at ease and you're too accepted and all of that, and this was a man who lived, came from Italy, lived back in, was a chaplain, I think, in World War I, and saw the horrors of that, lived through the time of fascism in Italy, prior to coming here to the US and everything. So, he knew some of that experience. You look at John Paul II, the strength. Now, there were good and bad to that, but, the strength of living under that environment, really brought out his strength and the strength of the people, in the sense of preserving their identity through the preservation of their faith.
Right.
You look at Francis, people don't pay enough attention to his life experience, but how he learned. Okay, this was a man who was very much in the box in Argentina and everything, and how he learned through the efforts of others who drew him out of himself, how he learned to act outside of the box while yet preserving his presence within the box.
Okay, because I always thought it, I didn't realize, and I know you had given me a book once that I read about him, and I read another, and I knew he sort of was in the box and went outside, but I didn't realize it was others who helped him sort of break the strictures of the box.
Many of the priests in the area, many of the people that he interfaced with, and one woman in particular, who was, I think her background was she was a lawyer, who was very much involved in the opposition. You know, she was a communist, really. And he had a very close relationship with her. You know, and I think in many ways, her being persecuted by the junta, you know, opened his eyes to what you had to deal with in the violence of that situation, you know, and yet he had, again, to maneuver inside the box and outside of the box at the same time. He used the seminary as a refuge to get people safely out of the country, you know, and interceded, you know, but he would have never gotten into the office of the head of the junta. It was the military. He would never gotten in to see them if he was not recognized as being within the box of the church.
Who played by the rules and was there.
Yeah. Kind of. Yeah. You know, and so again, I think the other thing is complexity. Dynamism brings about complexity, and you got to be comfortable living in those kind of environments.
It does, and you're right. And I guess the one thing for us to remember is that dynamism means we will make it through. It might not be tomorrow, and we, as you know, I'm 64, I may not live to see all the great things that the church might be able to do, but others will, and things will move in the right direction. They do say turning a battleship takes a long time.
That's right. And don't turn it too quickly or else you're going to have a disaster.
Exactly. So,
well,
yeah.
Thank you for a great afternoon and
well, thank
good discussion.
You. And I'm hoping to be at Catholic Charities on Thursday to help pack some bags. So
well, hopefully not only are you going to pack bags, but you'll have the opportunity to give them out to the people. They start lining up about 6 in the morning, you know, to receive the food.
Yep. Nope, that'd be great, because you do many good things and we are grateful for it. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And hopefully we'll see you in person soon, really.
I would hope so. Yeah.
Good. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.